topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
The National Alliance for Youth Sports was born out of a desire to bring order to the world of organized sports for children in America. While for the most part, children have a great experience playing sports, far too often parents and coaches lose perspective.
I'm gonna get you tonight because you let me down, brother.
No, I'm not.
You did. I'll get you, buddy. Cry about that.
This program is aimed at bringing some of America's best experts to talk about what we can do to change the atmosphere of win at all cost and parent poor behavior to one that focuses on children having a positive learning experience through sports. Here's our host, Fred Eng, the founder of the National Alliance for Youth Sports.
And good morning, everybody, and welcome to, I think this is the 15th edition of Why Johnny Hates Sports. And you ever hear that expression, from some of those shows called The Man on the Street? Well, today that's what we've got, a man on the street. Joel Dovey, he and I played golf together, and we were talking one day about, travel teams. And I said, Joel, you ought to be on our show. So I let him introduce Joel. So good morning, Joel.
Good morning, Fred. Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to see you.
Yeah. Hey, one of the things I wanted to show you that we did is a little bit of a video about travel teams. So we get our producer here, Juan, to show our little clip on it. So if you can check this.
Great.
It all started over 70 years ago. Kids played for fun in their neighborhood. Then things changed. Recreation departments were created across America to provide fields for organized sports programs organized by parents. Millions of children joined Little League kinds of programs for all sports. Little League sports became a household word. And then came travel teams. Self-described professional coaches began offering opportunities for kids to join elite teams for travel around the country to play in tournaments. According to many recreation leaders, travel teams are distorting recreational ball by siphoning talent, increasing financial and time burdens, and shifting focus from community fun to elite competition.
So there you have it, Joel, and obviously from our conversation, after playing golf that day, we talked a little bit about your experience of, having kids in travel team. So give us a kind of a brief description of what happened to you with your kids in travel.
Yeah, so I've got quite a bit of experience in the travel industry as well as the rec industry. I grew up playing soccer from a very young age, both rec and, of course, just like your video discusses, we moved right into travel at a certain age, and the time commitments changed and the pricing changed and whatnot. When I was younger, fortunately back then, it was still very community based, like you talked about. So travel teams back, 25 years ago or 30 years ago were still very community based, and teams stayed together for years, from maybe the age of 12 until 16, 17, 18, and then off we went. Now that I'm an adult and, either coaching or running a program or having my own children in both rec and travel programs, the difference is just staggering. It's just an amazing change from that community-based to kind of a race to end up on the best team or the right team. Costs have exploded. Travel and time commitments are, to say they're over the top would be I think that would do a disservice to that statement. It's just become a tremendous burden for families, I think. And what we found too, and I think we'll probably touch on this a bit, is the expectations not only for the kids, the players, but also from the parents have become a little bit over the top. And so anyway, it's a lot different environment than what we've seen over the last 20 years prior.
Okay, so you signed your kids up. So all of a sudden, what happened at that point in time when all of a sudden you said, well, we got to sign our kids up and now they're going to be in travel ball? So what happened?
Yeah, so when we started, our oldest, who is now 21, she started playing club soccer, travel soccer, around, let's say, 12, maybe 11, maybe 10. I wish I could tell you exactly, but it was very young. And at that time, as a former soccer player, I tried to help the coach and, give some of my expertise. That quickly turned into a tremendous time commitment for me now as a club coach. Not only being available an hour before every game and during the 3 times a week minimum practices for an hour and a half, but also, traveling with her to games that many times were several hours away. And this is for league games. Tournaments are a different issue. I think when people sign up to play club soccer or any other club sport, they recognize that their weekends are gone and they may be traveling, across the country, or they may be traveling 3 to 4 hours away. Sometimes it's a plane, sometimes it's a car. But even the league games nowadays are several hours away. So the commitment is tremendous, 1 or 2 games a weekend. So your entire weekend is gobbled up. We put our second daughter into travel, who's 2 years younger. And so now my wife is handling one, I'm handling the other. So, that impacts us. And then we have another child who's a couple of years younger, our son. And so he's getting kind of carted around to all these sporting events also. And then, we enter him into it. And so good night, it's just constant. So,
okay. So you mentioned that you had 2 daughters and now a son, and you used the word, Joel, we put them in that. And it raises a question in my mind with many parents and whatnot. Did they ever ask you if they could play, or did you put them in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's almost this natural matriculation that's occurring, and your video touched on that, where the community-based recreational leagues, which were, when I was younger, enough. They were high level. All the kids that were great players in each sport were involved in those community-based programs, and they were great. It feels like that has changed a bit, where what we're finding now is, the better players, or not even the better players, I would say even, any player who would be willing to pay the $3,000 to $5,000 a year to join a travel program are, if they're staying behind in the rec programs, they aren't finding the challenge, and they're finding that a lot of their friends have also left that program. So it's just, it's becoming kind of a natural matriculation. To answer your question, did we ask? We had conversations about it. It was a very quick conversation where it was the obvious next step for them, because they were decent players. So, not much conversation went on. Now we have, over time, yearly made sure that they want the commitment level that, travel or club soccer entails, because it's expensive, so we want to make sure that they're on board and that they're committed to the games and practices and whatnot, and that they really want to continue down this road. And both of our daughters eventually, I think it was junior year, did say, you know what, I'm done. I don't see myself going forward with this in college, so I don't want the commitment anymore. So at that age, they're mature enough to make that decision on their own.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned, you said something about $5,000, and this is a 4-part series where we have people like yourself, as I jokingly call the man on the street, to talk about it, that isn't directly involved as a recreation professional. But the last person we had on, I said, yeah, parents spend $5,000 a year to go, and she said, yeah, if they're lucky, if that's all
Yeah.
they have to pay is 5,000. She said most of the people up here in Ohio, they get their kids involved and they end up spending about $15,000 to go out there, which is, like you say, it's kind of almost crazy to have that amount of money. But here's another question I want to ask is, you know, there has to be some kind of pressure. I mean, when you got your kids involved, like in playing little league, whatever sport it was, usually that's pressure from, you know, your friends. Al and Mary's kid Tommy or Janet are 6 years old. Are they going to play little league baseball or softball? And you know, you're looking around saying, "Well, I guess so." So back to the did they ask you or did you put them? And then you just sign them up to play little league baseball or softball or whatever sport. And is that pressure the same kind of pressure that you feel now that your kid is playing and now they're going into travel ball because, you know, our neighbors down the street, their kids are playing travel ball?
Yeah, so two things there, Fred. First, you know, just to go back one step, your discussion with the previous guest about the costs associated, that $5,000 is just to play. You know, it's the travel expenses and the hotels, and you know that dollar commitment is absolutely doubles it, and to your guest point, maybe triples it. I choose not to pay a lot of attention to that part because I think that would help. That would make me leave it entirely. But yeah, it's definitely 10 or 15 once you're all in for a 12-month season, which is crazy. As far as pressure is concerned, you know, once I agree with you, it's definitely, you know, what your neighbors are doing, what the other kids are doing. There is pressure. So if your child, you know, is a soccer player or a baseball player and they're playing rec and all the kids start to move on and, hey, this team's better. It's, you know, they're doing more and there's potential for college. You know, it starts at such a young age where folks start to think, well, you know, if I don't put Johnny into the next level, A, he's not going to have his friends around him. So there's that pressure. But B, I'm losing a chance to have his college paid for. And so that pressure exists. And then once they're in, it's over. You know, once they're in, tryouts happen once a year. They're earlier and earlier every year. They used to be April and May. Now some places are March and April while you're still in season for soccer. But that pressure then exists to make the same team. And, you know, so then the pressure gets pushed over to the kids and they start to feel it. And you can see the anxiety build as tryouts get closer and closer. So I think to your point, there's a lot of pressure points in travel or club sports nowadays.
Wait a minute. You said something, Joel, that triggered for me. You said something about that they would lose their opportunity for a scholarship. And this is another thing that becomes such a fallacy of kids being on travel teams. But one of the funny things, not funny, I guess, but one of the comments that the previous person, the rec professional, said to me is about the scholarship thing. And she said, you know, that a lot of the parents believe that, you know, hey, this is the reason that we're spending this kind of money, you know, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 is because we want our kids to get a scholarship. And she said that the odds of that happening with all these kids playing, then she said, I said to the parents, you know, what if they didn't play a travel ball and you saved $15,000 a year? How about all that money going to college, you know, without having a scholarship? So you're spending money for travel teams that you could be spending for the kids' college.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head, 100%. So, you know, don't spend it, play rec, save the money, college is paid for. There's no doubt about that. But the road to college sports is littered with all these kids whose parents, and I think it's a parent issue. I don't think it's a player issue, whose parents have convinced themselves and their kids that, if they just work hard enough and they're great at the sport, that they're going to get money to play in school. And, not only is that money wasted because it offsets the scholarship that they get, but, I don't know the exact percentages, but they're very low. I've been in the soccer world for literally my whole life. And the amount of kids that I've seen get scholarships is so small. I mean, it's literally, you can count it on one hand. And many of those scholarships are, a couple $1,000s to go play at a school. So that's the other issue, is what defines a scholarship. If I'm going to a $80,000 a year school and I'm getting $30,000, I'm still paying $50,000 a year to go to that school, which I may or may not want to afford. If I'm going to a smaller, a less expensive state school, let's say 28 or $30,000 a year, and I'm getting two, what have I really accomplished for getting $2,000 a year, other than, getting a chance to play on that team, where maybe I might have even been able to walk on at that point. So, there's a lot of problems in that argument. But it's a constant that we hear from parents.
Yeah, you mentioned that being a constant thing, and you wonder, here as a parent, you're saying, okay, it's time for sports for my kids. And then you wonder how many of those kids are saying, I want to please my mom and dad. I don't want to say no. They're back to my question, did you ask them or put them? But when you kind of put them into these sports situations, you wonder how many of them are saying, I'm just doing this so I don't upset them. They really want me out there playing. They see how much I enjoy it, they think, but I don't really enjoy it. And then you find out after, let's say, 4 years of going through this pain, and you get it done, and you say to them, was it worth it? They say, well, I'd rather have gone over to the lake to go swimming with my other friends.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll share a quick personal story with you about one of our kids.
Sure. Great.
She's a good soccer player, ended up playing on a local, what's called ECNL team for soccer, which is a national soccer league. It's one of the top soccer leagues in the country, a lot of college scouts, so on and so forth. And as she got a little bit older in the sport, she was not necessarily keeping up with the rest of the kids. Decent player, but she was, outmatched by some of the other kids on the field. Got frustrated with the coach, and one day, he didn't play her. He pulled her out real quick, and I had been frustrated with him anyway. I had gone to the car once she was out of the game, and she came to the car after the game upset. And I looked at her and I said, I want you to know it's okay with me if you quit. She quit the next day. So to your point, at that stage, she knew, where she was on the team, and she was at that point playing for her parents, to keep them happy. And once she was relieved of that, she got over it pretty quickly, and, she started living her best life again. So anyway, it happens a lot.
And she went on and started playing the piano or got in drama.
That's right. Well, Fred, what's important, and I think what's missed in all of this with a lot of these kids, we would talk to our kids a lot about what scholarships aren't being discussed, and the ones that aren't being discussed as much are the academic scholarships. And so, my wife and I were both college athletes, and we talked to them about the probabilities of not only getting a scholarship, but actually playing in college, and how that may take away from the college experience. You might not play a lot anyway, so on and so forth. So we talked to them about academic scholarships, and they were both, so far, 2 kids in college, able to get small academic scholarships rather than focus so much on getting the soccer scholarships. So yeah, I mean, they had fun in school and they got good grades. They played soccer after that as kind of fun for high school, and it was more enjoyable for them.
Yeah, you brought back a little bit of memory for me. You're talking about, being a college athlete, and it brings me the word of burnout. I went through the same thing myself. I was a wrestler in high school, and the school I went to, they gave you a choice that you had to participate in sports throughout the year. So you could go to one sport or the other, or you could stay in the same sport. And of course, our wrestling coach said, "I'll just sign up for fall wrestling, winter wrestling, spring wrestling." And that's all I ever did. And 4 years in a row. And then I ended up going to college. And the first year of college, I said, "No, this is like a job. I mean, this is like work." Before it was kind of fun, and you're with your friends and enjoying tournaments and everything. But then you get the thing called burnout. I mean, I just got burned out, and I said, "I'm tired of having my face shoved down in the mat and somebody trying to kill me."
Yeah.
So I wonder, when you go back and you look at the years that you're doing it, and I'm guessing that maybe you're not still doing it, maybe you are, but doesn't matter. But if you look around and you see a lot of those kids, do they go through burnout? I mean, specialization with, the parents, "No, you don't want to play anything else, Mary. You're just going to, what you're going to do is you're going to stay and specialize." And the reason that you're going to do that is because if you don't, somebody's going to get better than you. So get out there and just practice every day, all year round. I'm sure you've seen that.
Absolutely. And it's, we read study after study after study that talks about the benefits of being a multi-sport athlete if you're an athlete. And all we hear from the club coaches is they want you to play their sport and their sport alone. And to the degree, and we do deal with this still, we have one who's a sophomore in high school, and we deal with the coaches, penalizing the players if they're a little bit late because maybe they were at a basketball practice, even though, from the standpoint that I'm looking at it as a non-coach, as a parent, I actually think that those players should be rewarded. If a 15 or 16-year-old boy is going to basketball practice after school for high school and then getting some food, resting a little bit, and going to practice, soccer practice, or walking out of that building and going directly to soccer practice, to me, that's showing someone who's dedicated to their sport, to all of their sports, and to their well-being and managing their time and so on and so forth. But instead, what we're finding is because they want them specialized, that they're actually penalizing them for that. We have found, and we've seen this just in our own experience, that our children are healthier mentally when they switch sports. So that changeover from, let's say, fall soccer to basketball in the winter, or from basketball in the winter to golf in the spring, you can see this actual physical and mental transformation in the way that they're handling themselves. Their burnout just from that 1-3 month period of everyday practice for, let's say, high school. And then they move on to the next sport with new players, new friends, new teammates that they haven't hung out with for a while, and new motions, changes, new challenges. And you can actually see that. So to your point, the burnout situation is tremendous. And you felt it when you got to college. I felt it when I got to college. I was a freshman in college, and I couldn't have cared less. Once I was there, I was kind of done. You just get to the point where you're like, I just am tired of this and doing it every day, all day for, 3-4 years straight to prep myself for this. So it's a tremendous issue.
Yeah. It's funny. Not funny again, but I've had the opportunity to interview so many different professional athletes over the years, and to a one, they have always said the best athletes I've ever been around on the teams I've been on are those that played a bunch of different sports, because the different sports can translate into one to the other, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, and it has made them better athletes. And so you look at it and you say, wow, doesn't the general public, people like yourself who have gone through it, say, yeah, maybe we should think of that as we try to get our kids a scholarship or get them to the Olympics or whatever level at the professional level, and that the odds are so great. But you would think people would think that way, but we all don't. We all don't, me included. we want our flesh and blood. We want the very best that we can think for them, and no matter what it is. And I always like to. People think and say, "Well, why does Johnny hate sports?" And it's not the fact that Johnny hates sports. It's a lot of things that the elements, the tiny little elements that add into it, whether early specialization or just early sign up, or the coaches that don't know what they're doing, or the leagues that don't know what they're doing. But the bottom line, Joel, and I know you'll agree, and I would love your comments here today, but the thing is sports is so great. I've learned that sports are the greatest lesson I think I've ever had in life. I mean, when I get down on things that I want to quit, like golf, I always go back to my days of wrestling where I was behind in a match, and I knew that if I gave up, that was the end of it. And I struggled to try to continue. And so the value of sports is so great, and it's great to see that you've had your kids in sports.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There are just so many lessons from any sports, whether you're a golfer, or a basketball player, a football player, football with discipline. And, golf is a tremendously difficult sport where if you work hard and you score well, you get rewarded for the effort that you put into it, time management and the psychology behind different sports. So it's just a tremendous thing to be involved in as an individual. It does give you a lot of life lessons. And we've watched, our kids and friends of our kids have failures and successes in sport. And it teaches you so much along the way. So I agree with you. And it's the keeping that for the kids rather than, robbing that from them. And that, I think, part of the, why Johnny hates sports idea kind of hints at that, where if you turn club soccer into, this kind of rat race towards having absolutely best players on every team and forgetting about the community aspect of the sport, you do take away some of those lessons that these kids are learning, teaching them a lot harder lessons at a younger age too. But there is some stuff that's lost there. So it is great. There's just so much to be happy about as an athlete.
Well, as you and I know, and many other people, we could sit here all day long and talk about sports and different sports stories that go on and on. But I want to thank you, Joel. You've been great. And the best part of this whole thing is, it's broadcast on the W4CY.com. It streams everywhere to YouTube and Spotify and whatnot. But the National Alliance for Youth Sports, we send it out to 12,500 people that are recreation people in communities across the country. These are the people that should be watching and hearing what you're saying in this, because you've been there, you've done it, and the advice, I'll call it, has been just tremendous. So I want to thank you as being our man on the street today for Why Johnny Hates Sports.
And thank you, Fred, so much for having me and for everything you're doing. Just doing a wonderful service there. So I truly appreciate it. And thanks again for having me on the show.
You got it.
Why Johnny Hates Sports is a best-selling book about kids in sports. It chronicles why, at a very early age, children are thrust into organized sports long before they have the necessary skills to feel successful. Fathers and mothers are asked to be their coach without having any training on how to coach. And the leagues in which kids play are governed by volunteers whose main focus becomes scoreboards, championships, and all-star games. Statistics show that close to 70% of kids will have quit by the age of 13. Most said it ceased to be fun. And that's why Johnny hates sports.
Well, that's it. So I sure do hope that you'll be back here for our third edition next week for talking about travel teams. And we're going to be talking with another great recreation specialist across the country. So tune in again next Friday morning at 11.
This program is sponsored by Sir Durf Publishing in the interest for better sports for kids, better kids for life.